You might think that slavery is a thing of the past, but right now, almost 50 million people are trapped in slavery worldwide. This is according to an article by antislavery.org. Anti-Slavery International has defined modern slavery as when an individual is exploited by others. They point out that in this type of slavery, there are some aspects of control, involuntary actions, and exploitation for personal or commercial gain. Whether tricked, coerced, or forced, the individual loses their freedom. Today's spotlight is on a British citizen, British-Sudanese, author of the international best-selling autobiography Slave. She endures 8 years sold into slavery of the 21st century, both in Africa and the United Kingdom. When she finally breaks free from slavery, she must now fight for asylum, for the right to stay in the United Kingdom as a refugee, or be taken back to Sudan, which according to her situation at the time when she got her freedom, would have brought her within the scope of the Geneva Convention of 28 July 1951, in which this convention defines who a refugee is and sets out the rights of individuals who are granted asylum and the responsibilities of nations that grant asylum to these refugees. So, 30 years on, here's the story of Mende Nazer, a British author and human rights activist. So let's get a little back history of the slave trade so that you will understand the story of Mende Nazer. During the period of the Roman Empire, the Romans established a system of trading slaves that extended from North Africa down to the Sahara in sub-Saharan Africa. In the 7th and 8th centuries, Arab invasion of the Roman territories in North Africa led to the Arabs taking control of this slave trade. Over the course of nearly a millennium, Arabs utilized this slave trade network to capture Africans from the Sahara and sub-Saharan regions, employing them from various forms of labor in North Africa. So Arabs were known for being notorious for their raids on African villages, where they would abduct individuals for domestic service, agricultural work, and hard labor. Sudan is a country that was deeply impacted by this slave trade, with its present condition greatly influenced by the extensive exploitation of its black African population throughout history. And of course, we also know it's an oil-rich country. The repercussions of this history, including the raiding of villages and enslavement of its people, have caused significant tension between Arabs of the north and Africans of the south in Sudan, and have resulted in the tragic loss of numerous innocent lives in the past years. Now that we have that knowledge, let's dive into Mende's story. Mende hails from the Kako tribe, which is located in Sudan's Nuba Mountains. Although the precise date of her birth remains uncertain due to the absence of birth records among the Nuba, it is estimated that she was born around 1981. Her early years were filled with serenity as she experienced a traditional rural upbringing alongside a family in a typical village where cattle rearing and agriculture had been the primary means of sustenance for so many years. So, in 1983, in the beautiful region of the Nuba Mountain village in Sudan, there were well-knit communities of the Sudan Kako tribe. And just for clarification, the Nubians in East Africa call it the Kakua tribe, but in this story it's pronounced Kako. So in 1993, the Kako tribe is just doing life as usual. You know, family things, sports, rites of passage like circumcision, coming of age events, which includes some old age traditions like female genital mutilation, which I don't advocate for. They would also engage in marriage ceremonies, cattle rearing, sorghum farming, and kids being given a chance to be kids. Mende was an adored and coddled child of a loving family. She had a life full of love and enjoyment from her family. So one day, in the middle of the night, their village gets attacked by Arab raiders who start setting their houses ablaze, the men being their women. Mende's father had gone out and he heard some noise, but these were actually raiders who had invaded their village. Remember, I began by giving you a backstory of how Arabs took over slave trade in the 7th and 8th century. It was actually called the Trans-Saharan slave trade. So Mende and her mom ran out after their father, and they all started running towards the mountain to hide because everyone was going towards the mountains as it was safer there. There were so many people, including men, women, and children. So they were running, and Mende was holding tight to her father, but a herd of cattle that was running away from the fire separated her from her father. Amidst the stench of burning blood and terror, she was calling out for her father, and then a man grabbed her from behind and told her to stay still and be quiet, otherwise the raiders would kill her. At this point, Mende was not sure whether her parents were alive or so this raider took her into the forest, where she found about 30 other kids rounded up, and she was told to wait there together with this bunch of kids, with the promise that they were going to be taken back to their parents. But that was not the case. After the chaos, these abductors embarked on a journey to Khartoum, and in the course of this journey, they battered Mende severally, thereby damaging her pubic area, as she had undergone FGM earlier as a part of tradition. They left her badly wounded. Eventually, they reached Khartoum and she was sold into slavery. They never took 12-year-old Mende back to her parents. This was the beginning of her painful and heartbreaking journey into slavery. In Khartoum, she arrives at Abdulazim's house, who is a slave trader. They are taken to the basement of that house and work to feed the guests of the house. There, Mende meets Asha, an elderly woman who now plays a motherly role, where she educates her on the ways of life as a worker under slavery and how to impress her masters. Asha helps Mende to understand the basics of slave life before she can be taken in by Rahab. Asha was also brought in as a child, and she also mastered the art of obedience to her slave holders and made sure that whatever they needed was availed to prevent her masters from harming her. So she's passing her noble knowledge to Mende. She tells Mende a little bit of her story, how she was captured at the age of 10 and she was very small, so they brought her there and she has been there ever since. She's asked Mende to be patient and whatever her master tells her, she should do. So after having this conversation, Mende now knows that if she starts to rebel, it might land her in trouble. So she does everything that Asha has taught her because it's the only solution to her survival. So time came when people visited Abdulazim's basement and they would choose which slave they wished to buy. So Mende gets a master whom she sold to. Her name was Rahab, a cruel and insensitive madam from this rich Arab family in Khartoum. This is modern day Khartoum, where there is already civilization. They have kitchen sinks, spoons, hair dryers, mirrors, a telephone, etc. The things that someone from a remote village like Mende's had not experienced. And also, it didn't dawn on Mende that something like the telephone could help her escape her misery. So Rahab's house is pretty modern. But the next 6 years, between 1993 and 1998, she lives with Mende as her slave. This is where Mende's dark 6 years of enslavement really takes a 360. Rahab and her husband, Mustafa, who are now Mende's owners, would first deny her a name. They would call her Yebit, meaning a girl who's not worthy of a name, and sometimes call her a black slave. And in turn, she called them master. She was subjected to battery, physical and mental abuse, harsh living conditions like sleeping in a shed outside and eating on a small metal table secluded away from the family, and this won't be fresh food but family leftovers. She had no rights, no freedom, and no life of her own. She would endure multiple instances of exploitation and cruelty, like at one time Rahab's brother wanted to touch her inappropriately and was also denied an education while living in constant fear of her life. Because Rahab would always threaten her, she was instructed in house chores and was told that she would take care of Rahab's 2 children, Usra and Hanin, and was not allowed actually to touch or play with those children. And this segregation emotionally tormented Mende. She would be locked in that tiny room outside that house for up to a week in total darkness as punishment. So sad. One day, Rahab beats Mende so badly she has to be hospitalized, and Rahab warns her that she should not tell the doctors what happened because then the nurses will realize that she was abused. So she was asked to say that she fell from a stool while trying to get something above the kitchen storage and that she is a servant who gets paid, but in reality she was a slave overworked, denied basic human rights, and never paid for any labor. While at Rahab's house, Mende shows her religious side, which is Islam. She was religious from way back in her village. She loves her musalla, which is the Muslim prayer mat, but loves her master's musalla even more because it's really beautiful. So one time she was performing her salah, which is the Muslim prayer, and Hanin, one of the children, sees that. So he goes to tell his mother about it. So Rahab lashes out at Mende and starts calling her names that are rich, and also believes that Mende's prayers are hypocritical because she's copying them. In short, she tells Mende that prayers are not for black people like her. Rahab was now planning to ship Mende to London because she had reached puberty and is becoming more attractive and is posing a threat to her because of the advances male visitors would throw at Mende. Luckily, months before she is shipped to London, Mende meets a girl whose name is Kumal, who was also a slave and was from her village. Kumal tells her that she met a Nuba man who knows Mende's family, and in case they ever met, Kumal should let Mende know that her parents are alive, including her entire family. This message gave Mende some new hope and strength. Kumal also gave her a phone number that she could use to call back home. In May 2000, 6 years into her captivity, Rahab decides that it's time to send Mende to London as a gift to her sister Hanan, a wife to a Sudanese diplomat known as Abdel Al-Koronki, who was acting charge d'affaires at Sudan's embassy in London, to be a household servant. At this time, London is a country where slavery had been outlawed for like 170 years, but Mende goes into this family and is still in captivity and is struggling to break through in this 21st century. I find it so disturbing that this is a practice that is still all too alive and well in a supposed modern world. In the beginning, Hanan treats her well and allows her to have her own food and own prayer mat. She was allowed to use the household appliances to make her work easier, although they were very foreign to her, like the washing machine and the vacuum cleaner, which she actually clearly terrified of. Hanan would also call her by name rather than calling her a bit, like Rahab did. She was not beaten or verbally abused, and this good treatment continued for a while until now. One day, Mende asked Hanan how she may use the telephone number she had been given by Kumal in Khartoum, the same girl who gave her good news about her family back there. This incident now caused her relationship with Hanan to go downhill. Hanan totally changed. She was not the same woman who hugged Mende the first time she arrived in London to work in her house. She now started behaving like her sister Rahab. She would shout at Mende when she would make the slightest mistakes. She also began to call her names and was now watching her really closely, knowing that she had this phone number. The only time Mende was allowed to go outside was when she was going out on the driveway to throw garbage, and Hanan would keep an eye on her from her room upstairs. So one day, Hanan and her children decided to go back to visit Sudan, and they were planning to leave Mende alone with Hanan's husband Al-Koronki. But Mende objected strongly because it was a violation of Muslim law for a single woman to be alone in the house with a man who's not her husband, or how it is called in Islam, a non-mahram. So in the end, she only stayed with Hanan's husband for a week, and then he also left to join his family in Sudan. However, Mende was taken to this Sudanese couple. I think they were Al-Koronki's neighbors. They were known as Omer and Medina. They also didn't know that Mende was a slave, so they were treating her very well because they assumed she was a servant, not a slave. And Mende was shocked, like wow, she could notice the difference in treatment, and she realized that her life at Rahab's house was indeed miserable. One day the driver was driving Mende to Hanan's house so that she could do the weekly cleaning because Hanan was still in Sudan, and he asked her why she was crying the previous evening, and was also inquiring about her situation with the Al-Koronki family. So Mende explained, though not much, she stated that she never got time off work and was never paid at all. So he proceeds to tell her that no one works in London without pay because that's the law in the UK. Mende is afraid to talk much but asks him for help, but because this guy works with Al-Koronki, she fears she would put the guy's job at risk. So she decides to look for help elsewhere. One day, Mende goes out to do shopping for Medina, Omer's wife. Because they would allow her to go out by herself and do shopping, Hanan is still in Sudan at this time with her family. Mende sees a man and she thinks to herself, this man might be a Sudanese. And then she approaches him and tells this man her story. So the man promises that he will help her escape. So now Mende has an escape plan in place. But now she has to wait for Hanan to come back from Sudan with her family so she can execute her plan. She doesn't want to run while at Omer's house because they had been so kind to her and she wouldn't want to put them in trouble. So the Al-Koronki family come back from Sudan. Life goes on. Then on the appointed date for escaping, she goes down the driveway and runs out of the gate, and on the street a car was waiting for her. She runs so fast and gets into the car and they drive away. Finally, on 11th September, the year 2000, Mende Nazer is free. Well, she had broken free from slavery, yes, but something else was waiting for her out there. In the next 2 years, which is between 2001 and 2003, Mende's ordeal continues. She must fight for asylum and the right to live in the UK as a refugee. In the meantime, she was taken into a standard asylum seeker accommodation, but after a few months, she moved in with Damien Lewis and his girlfriend. Damien Lewis was a journalist and writer who used to report on war-torn, disaster and conflict zones, and had already covered Sudan in his works for BBC and other global news organizations. Mende was introduced to him after her grand escape from the Al-Koronki's household. While at Damien's house, she's still in fear and doesn't come into terms with her freedom. So she's constantly thinking her masters are coming back for her. At one point, they are invited to a dinner at a private members restaurant in Green Park by Baroness Caroline Cox, who wanted to hear her story. Baroness Cox is a human rights campaigner and ex-deputy speaker for the House of Lords in Britain. So they have something to eat as a first-course meal, and here Mende proceeds to clear the table soon after. This shows some automatic ingrained behavior patterns. She was not used to being waited on. It's as if she was used to being the waiter, the server, the one doing things. These are the behavior patterns from her captivity showing up. I believe it's safe to say that Mende was psychologically damaged. The damage ran deep. She had no idea how to do things for herself, how to survive. According to Damien's words, she didn't know how to get on a bus, how to manage money or open a bank account, and she had no idea how to navigate around London. Sometimes she would clean Damien's house from top to bottom, just like she was used to doing during her captive years. And Damien would actually tell her to just stop and ask her to please put down the hoover, like he doesn't want his house cleaned. Also, she didn't know how to make friends. She had trouble forming relationships because everyone she met in her previous life since her capture was either her master or her master's family or the circle of friends, so she learned to trust nobody but herself, her memories and her dreams. She didn't really understand what friendship is because according to her, a good friend will never turn on you and beat you for no reason. Get this, it's so sad. In 2002, Mende presented her case and told her slavery story to the Home Office in London. However, application for asylum was initially turned down by the government. The UK government was of the notion that Sudan was a safe country, hence Mende should return back. By then, her book had been published in German and with all the gory details about her slavery story. Her story was public, so she was already gaining popularity across Europe and other regions. No one could quite believe that the British government intended to send Mende back to Sudan, where she faced the possibility of incarceration or enslavement again. However, in November 2002, there was an appeal and her application succeeded and she was given leave to remain in the UK, where she intended to settle. So she was taken to a lawyer and the asylum process began. Now she had to start learning English and also getting used to being free. And over time she learns English. And also in 2005, the English language edition of her autobiography was published. It was co-authored together with Damien Lewis, the British journalist who had taken her in under his wings sometime back after her escape. In 2006, she takes the journey back to her homeland, accompanied by Baroness Caroline Cox and her team. 13 years later, at the age of about 24 or 25, she's reunited with her people in a safe part of the village of her origins. In 2010, her life story was dramatized in the Channel 4 film I Am Slave, starring Wumi Musaku, and in 2012, it was the subject of a stage play entitled Slave. By the time her book was out, Mende was studying full-time where she was planning to fulfill her ambitions to become a nurse. She's married to a Nuba man she met during a book signing event in the US. She also has a foundation called the Mende Nazer Foundation that helps to bring education in her village, a dispensary, and also water for her people. And finally, after her visit back to Sudan, she wrote another book titled Freedom, a sequel to I Am Slave, My True Story. And that is the story of the Nuba mountain girl with the resilience of the unbroken human spirit who is now embracing the joys and blessings of a life lived in freedom. Thank you so much for watching, and please give your feedback in the comment section down below if you read the book. Also, kindly give this video a thumbs up. It will really help with the algorithm. And finally, hit the subscribe button if you haven't. See you in the next video. Bye.